In our journey through classic cocktails and their history, it's probably about time that we stopped off at the Manhattan. The Manhattan is perhaps not as widely known as its predecessor, the Old Fashioned, but it is iconic among discerning drinkers for its complexity and depth of flavour. I've spoken in other episodes about vermouth being a wonder ingredient for packing layers of nuance into a simple cocktail, and this is a prime example of that. It also, incidentally, is the cocktail that made me fall in love with booze-forward stirred-down drinks, and I haven't looked back since. But before we get to making our Manhattan, let's take a look at its history and what ingredients you're going to need to make a great one. The Manhattan actually enjoyed quite a clear-cut and entertaining origin story until fairly recently. The story went that Jenny Jerome, who would go on to become Lady Randolph Churchill, hosted a party at the Manhattan Club in 1874 in honour of a New York governor nominee and called for whiskey and vermouth to celebrate. The only problem is, as cocktail historian David Wondridge pointed out, Jenny Jerome was actually in England and pretty busy with the birth of her child Winston when this party took place. What is true is that the Manhattan Club, which is a private members club, was once situated in a building which had previously been owned by Jenny's father, and so when Winston Churchill became a pretty well-known figure, this small link grew legs into a good story. It is possible that it was invented at the Manhattan Club specifically, but there's no real way to verify it, and there are several other plausible claims. What does make sense is that there were massive waves of Italian immigration to the US around this time, and so they would have brought their beloved sweet vermouth with them. It was only a matter of time before some bright spark mixed it with the indigenous whiskey and some bitters as a twist on the foundational American cocktail, the Old Fashioned. The story of which you should check out in another of my videos if you haven't already. So many of the original references to the Manhattan, for instance in Harry Johnson's Bartender's Manual in 1900, don't specify bourbon or rye, they say only whiskey. So New York was at that time a rye drinking city, and so it was more likely that this is what it would have been made with, and I'm sticking with that here. But a bourbon Manhattan can be equally delicious. I'm using Michter's for its rich, fruity and spicy flavour profile. It just brings a little bit of everything to the table. For vermouth, I'm going with Antica Formula. The vermouth portion of the cocktail is what differentiates a dry, perfect and sweet Manhattan, just like in the martini. However, unlike in the martini, a dry Manhattan is literally one made with dry vermouth, a perfect is made with both sweet and dry, and a sweet Manhattan is made with sweet vermouth. If you just ask for a Manhattan, then generally the standard is sweet. And please don't be afraid of this, it doesn't mean overly sugary. Sweet vermouth still has a nice bitterness to it and it rounds out the spicy rye. A perfect Manhattan is a good option if you're using bourbon rather than rye, as the dry vermouth does balance out that slightly sweeter whiskey base. For me, the Manhattan tends to be an end-of-the-night drink, and so I go for this richer and sweeter style of vermouth. Antica is a vermouth alla vaniglia, meaning that vanilla sits alongside the bittersweet wormwood as a predominant flavour, so it's perfect for a more digestive style cocktail. Using something lighter and brighter like Martini Rosso along with a lemon twist would completely transform this drink into a spicy and complex aperitif. For bitters, we're going with Angostura. In Harry Johnson's recipe in 1900, the modifiers in the cocktail were curacao, absinthe and orange bitters. This has been streamlined somewhat. The Manhattan is one of those cocktail unicorns that can be made in basically any bar as long as they have American whiskey, vermouth and bitters, so most. And so Angostura is now accepted as the standard, probably because of its ubiquity. If you do have some fun bitters to play with though, I would definitely go with it. I love the different notes you can get from Abbott's, Peychaud's or Boker's bitters. Now, the garnish has a massive effect on this drink. As I mentioned, using a lemon twist really lifts and brightens it into something quite different. Because I am going for a more digestive style, I'll twist and discard an orange for a richer citrus note and garnish with a cherry. Some of the initial recipes for the Manhattan called for maraschino liqueur actually in the drink, but this is generally morphed into just being a cherry garnish. Just be wary though, not all cherries are created equal, and you don't want to ruin your perfectly balanced cocktail with a big gloop of radioactive cherry juice. At Bomba, we use Morello cherries for a darker, more sour snack at the end of your cocktail. As always, you want to make sure that you've got your garnish prepared before you start. So we've got our cherries on hand, and I'm gonna cut a twist from the orange. As I said, we are just gonna twist and discard. You've already got a cherry in the drink, so you don't really want multiple things bobbing about in there. So it doesn't have to look pretty, it's just gonna give you a nice aroma. In your mixing glass, you want to pop in your bitters, 2 big dashes of this, 50 mils of your rye whiskey. Now, obviously, if your vermouth is open, it should be in the fridge, so grab that out, and we'll do 20 mils of the sweet vermouth. Now, the general rule of thumb is that if a cocktail has juice, whether citrus or other, it should be shaken, and cocktails which have all booze should be stirred. This one is no different. You want the texture to be smooth and silky, just how you feel when you're drinking it. You want to fill your mixing glass with as much ice as you can fit in there. And then you're going to stir your drink by placing the back of your bar spoon against the inside of the mixing glass and pushing the ice around. Obviously, this cocktail has a lot of spirit in it, so it does take a little bit of dilution to make it nice and palatable. Especially be conscious of that if you're using a higher proof rye. Once you start to feel the mixing glass get really cold and a little bit frosty, give it a taste. Delicious. Grab your coupe out of the fridge or freezer, use a julep strainer to hold the ice back, and pour into your glass. Grab your orange twist and just give it a sharp fold over the top of the glass so you're getting all of the oils out of the skin. And then last but not least, grab your cherry and pop it in to the bottom of the glass. Obviously you can stick it on a skewer if you like, but I quite like it soaking in the drink, and then that's my last mouthful, a lovely boozy and sour cherry. A sweet Manhattan, so now you know.